I beg you to try it, Patricio.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricio. You were there once in your life.
Hey, people. Trish Wood here, and I am feeling kind of sad. It is Thursday, September the 8th at, it's about 3:22 when we're recording this. I'm time-stamping it because the Queen has just died. There was big drama all morning when a note was brought into the House of Parliament in London and handed to the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. People were rushing about the House, and then it was announced that the children and grandchildren were on their way up to Balmoral, where she has been for a little while now. So that's sad news. The show is Canadian, and as a girl, I grew up in schools where we had God Save the Queen piped in the morning. I believe we stood and sang along from the principal's office. So that was a big part of growing up in Canada. And, I know that opinions change, and I suppose politically and culturally people are not as enamored with the royal family, but I love the institution. I definitely loved her and what she stood for. I mean, listen, 70 years on the throne, that is longer than I have been alive, and I'm not young. She was 96 years old, as I'm sure you've been following the coverage by now and you know it, but I didn't want to do the show, especially since we're recording it on the day she died, without marking this as a very somber and solemn day. I guess it's not a tragedy when somebody who's 96 dies, but it does represent, at least for me, the passing of something that I would, if I was going to write this up in a speech to make somewhere, it would probably be smarter. But off the cuff, I would say that it feels like people like, Her Majesty, the way she comported herself, the idea of, I guess the words are duty and service above all else. Yes, she carried out the duty and service in a million palaces and, and had everything anybody could ever want. But what she didn't have really was privacy or time to herself. She did live in service of the country and her subjects, and she did it well. She played the role. That was the role, and she did it well. So although I suppose it's not a big tragedy, it is sad because I feel that those attributes are not something that we honor today. Everybody wants to speak their own truth and talk about how overburdened they are and no one understands them. She didn't do that. And she was a super private person who had many, many burdens. She had a couple of, troublesome kids, troublesome grandchildren as well. And, that was all kept private. The only time that she really slipped, in my view, was in her handling of Diana. She misjudged that very, very badly. And I think it was a shock for her to realize how beloved Diana had been. And she got it, and she fixed her attitude about it quite quickly. But that was maybe, in my view, the only real misstep of Queen Elizabeth II that I can recall, having not done the research, because I wasn't expecting this to happen today, nor did I think I would be talking about it. But as I say, the tragedy is the passing of an era of duty and service and behaving in such a way publicly that brings people together. Those are attributes that are just, we admire the Kardashians now, where everything is hanging out. People are running around half naked, putting their sex tapes online. I much prefer the way the Queen comported herself. It was also one of the reasons I have been an absolute and total detractor of the way that Harry and Meghan have comported themselves. They've been the opposite of that, actually. They're demanding money. They're selling their proximity to the royal family to the highest bidder. They're criticizing their family publicly. They dropped that Oprah interview, which was full of poison, when Prince Philip was in the hospital. Right? I mean, so they are the opposite of the Queen. And I'll just say this about Harry. who I used to really like and was so happy initially when he married Meghan. It was a really fun wedding and she looked beautiful and there was all kinds of hopeful portents about their union until it all went south because of, in my view, their own egos. But one of the things that I think we should all maybe think about for a second is the idea that Harry and Meghan were invited up to Balmoral about a week ago because they were going to be in the UK for the One Young World event, and then they popped over to Dusseldorf on a German plane marked Luftwaffe. That was a really bad move, too. They were bombing Britain, for God's sakes. Come on. I mean, they just keep making so many missteps. But anyway, and they turned down the chance to see the Queen ailing up in Balmoral. They did. Why would they do that? It just she didn't see her father who had a stroke. They didn't go see the Queen who was clearly dying. I mean, there's something wrong with these two. Can we please stop showering Harry and Meghan with money and praise like they're actually worth something, because they're not. That's all I'm going to say. Queen's grandson. I'll try and be nice for the rest of the show about it. But what a terrible shambles. I remember from the Jubilee, as I'm sure you do too, that Paddington Bear moment, which was extraordinary. And maybe that's how I will choose to remember Queen Elizabeth II going forward, was that how she played ball in that wonderful, saying she kept a jam sandwich in her purse. Wasn't that lovely? It was so well done too. It was really beautiful. Anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about the Queen in the closing, but I want to get to today's show. Now, this is also kind of a momentous occasion because this is an issue that for the first time ever, David Fissman and I are in total agreement. He was one of the COVID advisors in Ontario, who I think he's kind of a COVID zero guy. That's how he behaved. I mean, anything David Fissman said, I hated it. I disagreed with it. We couldn't be farther apart on how this province handled Ontario. But he did tweet out something about physician-assisted dying, or now it's called medically assisted dying. I guess they don't want to just have the doctors as the perpetrators of it. But he tweeted out something about how it's gone too far. And I said, you and I are in total agreement. And he responded, so that's nice. There is a place where he and I can meet anyway. And this is it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because I did a film about what was then called PAD for the CBC with a very bright young-ish director named Nadine Pequeneza, who is enormously talented and a wonderful storyteller. And when we did that film, the law had just been opened up to allow physician-assisted dying in Canada in a broader way. And of course, it raises all sorts of questions, doesn't it? I mean, we think we're for it, and I kind of thought I was for it when I was doing that film, and have really subsequently changed my mind. COVID, in part, has done that. I no longer trust doctors to have my best interests at heart. I feel they're part of a large governmental establishment, and they've dehumanized us during the COVID times. And you all know why I feel that way, because they did do that. They absolutely did that. So I don't trust them to advise me on issues around physician-assisted dying or medically assisted dying, and do it in a way that has my best interest at heart. That trust I had in the medical profession is long gone and maybe never coming back again. So what has burbled up about on this issue is that many of the things we talked about in that film as being what they say in all of these moral arguments, the slippery slope, right? Okay, it's what we're doing with this complex thing is okay now, but incrementally it's going to not be okay and not be okay and not be okay. That is what the opponents of physician-assisted dying said in the film. And I thought, okay, well, more power to you. That's a reasonably thoughtful argument, but I didn't believe it. I didn't believe what they were warning about. And what they were warning about, and this is what we saw in places like Belgium and Holland, where they were much farther down the road, that people were requesting euthanasia because they were depressed, right? And that's, depression can be a transient thing. I am someone who suffered from depression, so I get it, but it also can be a transient thing. So then suicide becomes a permanent solution to a temporary problem, right? We want our medical system to fix people. And if you cannot fix them, to make their life endurable in somehow, not in any way to downplay how bad depression could be. But if we're killing people who are depressed through euthanasia, we societally have a problem. We have a problem. The other issue is dementia. Obviously, you can sign an advance directive when you get your Alzheimer's diagnosis and say, I never want to live if I don't recognize my children. That sounds like what we'd all say, right? But when we looked at people far down the road with Alzheimer's, they were kind of happy. Many of them were sort of happy. We don't want to be like that. We look at that and say, oh, I couldn't, I don't want to be that way. But they seemed happy and they didn't seem to want to die. So then what do you do legally? This is a very, very tricky question. They said they want to die if they don't recognize their children. Now they don't recognize their children, but they seem happy. So then do you force euthanasia on a happy person? This is a problem, right? And I don't think that we are smart enough. I don't think human beings are smart enough now. And I don't think we're spiritual enough anymore to handle these kinds of decisions. And part of it is living through COVID, right? COVID changed my relationship with the medical profession. I don't trust them, as I said. So I think if you look at how complicated some of the cases are, and you can't trust your doctor to give you advice that's purely about what's best for you and not what's best for the hospital or him or her or society at large, whatever, then those have to be taken right off the table. And what we are seeing in Canada is this slippery slope toward all this broadening up of who is eligible for MAID. I'm going to call it MAID instead of PAD. Which is, again, medical assistance in dying. So I came across the other day the story of a guy named Roger Foley, who was in a hospital in London, Ontario, Canada. He has a neurodegenerative disease, a fatal neurological disorder called cerebellar ataxia that just gets worse and worse and worse. He'd been in the hospital for a couple of years, and he wasn't able to get the kind of home care he wanted, and they were trying to get him out of the hospital. So, clever fellow that he ran some audio tape of an emissary from the hospital coming in and discussing how to get him out of there. One of the things they do is they say, well, we're going to bill you $1,600 a day or some ludicrous amount to stay in here. And also the idea of physician-assisted dying, medical assistance in dying is brought up in this conversation as an option. So I want to play this for you, and then we will come back and talk a little bit more about where we're going with the show today.
What happens to me per day after September 11th?
If your stay is uninsured, then the hospital would bill you for staying in the hospital.
How much?
A per diem rate. It's I don't know what the exact number is, but it's north of $1,500 a day.
North of $1,500 a day? Do you know the Minister of Health, Deb Matthews, and you can look this up. I read the article last night, is that's not legal for the hospital to do, and it's coercion to threaten that.
I know the exact letter you're talking about. It's in reference to patients who are waiting for long-term care.
Oh, no, this is an article in the Star where Deb Matthews came open to the media about how she wants hospitals to stop threatening patients.
Yeah. Because there was a time at which people were not using that information correctly, and it was used when it shouldn't have been. In this case, I am assured that Brent and our legal team would have reviewed whether or not it is applicable. We do not use this conversation in the situation, in every situation. It is only in situations where somebody has a plan in the community that is feasible, that they're not willing to accept, and that's okay.
Oh, wait. You just said there's a plan, so I haven't been informed of what the plan is. and what the planning was. I haven't been a part of it. You just violated my rights under the Home Care Bill of Rights, the participation right. You've already violated my preferences and also reprisals. So what's the plan that you know of?
Roger, this is not my show. I told you my piece of this was to talk to you about if you had interest in assisted dying.
How are you feeling, Raj? Are you feeling like you want to harm yourself or anything like that?
Well, like, I'm always thinking I want to end my life because of the way things are going. Like, if I had self-directed funding, then I'd be fine,
But if you weren't, you can just apply to get assisted. If you wanted to end your life, like, you know what I mean? You don't have to do it in some dramatic manner. You can apply for assisted, you know.
Well, they already presented the outcome option to me, but it's like, why force me to end my life when...
Oh, no, hang on here. I'm saying if you feel that way, you know, don't get me wrong. I'm saying I don't want you to be here and wanting to take your life if you're having these thoughts, because you always have these thoughts.
Well, because I'm trapped. It's my intolerable suffering is due to the system creating it. I want out of that system. I need self-directed funding, and
yes, but that's something that you're continuing to fight.
Yeah, I'm fighting for my life.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is, don't be rash, and I don't want you to be here because I've noticed that you don't want any forks or knives or anything here. So I don't want you to be doing anything rash.
Well, it's when the hospital threatens me and puts me through rough treatment.
But you know, I'm not here to defend the hospital because it's neither here nor there. But there's no one else I know who's been in the hospital for 2 years.
What?
No one else that I know who's been in the hospital for this amount of time.
Okay, so that is Roger Foley talking to, as I understand it, a representative of the hospital. It seemed like two different people there talking about assisted dying. Very, very dicey situation where you have someone, the hospital wants them out, threatening to, well, he's got a huge bill for staying there. He doesn't want to go because he can't get the kind of home care he feels he needs. So that kind of discussion is it feels unseemly to me, and I just don't think we can go there as a culture. It's really, really bad. So I want to talk to you a little bit about supporting us if you believe at all in what we're doing here at Trish What is Critical. We have a PayPal, we have a Patreon, and a Substack too. And you can access the Substack by just typing in Trish What is Critical Substack. It'll pop up. And you can also go to trishwoodpodcast.com. And if you go there and hit I think it's the support button or donate button or something, it will show you how to get to our Patreon or our PayPal. Our preferred method of payment, if you're going to give a monthly pledge to us, is through Substack now, because it's a very, very aggressively free speech platform, and that means a lot to us. We want to really be supporting that. So, and we are doing some writing too that many of you seem to be enjoying. So, do keep us in mind. That's how we keep the lights on around here, and I'm always very, very grateful. I am going to be going to the Free Speech in Medicine conference in Nova Scotia. We have many wonderful people coming up for that. Jay Bhattacharya, yay, who I've spoken to a zillion times and never met, so that's going to be a big moment for me. And many other great voices from the COVID times, people who took risks and spoke out at a time when it was very dangerous to do so. And the idea, this is Dr. Chris Milburn is putting it on, the idea that free speech is somehow negated during times of scientific and medical crisis is anathema to how you practice medicine. I mean, it's insane, right? But it actually happened. I mean, people who had different ideas, and as it would show later, better ideas on how to deal with COVID-19 were silenced and accused of being conspiracy theorists and spreading misinformation, disinformation. Of course, we now know that Tony Fauci and others in the government in the States were contacting big tech and demanding censorship, and they went along with it. I do believe there is a lawsuit going ahead, fueled in part by the great Martin Kulldorff, that is going to expose documents around that. So we are going to get those. But we know what happened. There was another case where some documents came out, and they were asking for these people to be silenced. Now, I want you to hold this idea in your heads, and that is this. Many of the things that people were silenced for saying were actually things that would have gotten us out of the pandemic sooner and saved lives. So I believe there has to be a reckoning. I don't feel like I want to be Mrs. Nice Guy about this. When people like Jay and Martin and Sunetra Gupta and Scott Atlas and many, many other brave people were silenced, kicked off of YouTube. Can you imagine these eminent people being kicked off by some 21-year-old nerd working in the algorithm department at YouTube because Biden's afraid of them or whatever? I mean, honestly, we cannot live this way. And damage was done. And somebody needs to be held accountable for that. And I hope they will be one day. So let's get back to our show. Our first guest is going to be the lawyer for Roger Foley. His name is Ken Berger. And then coming into the conversation in a few minutes is Tom Koch, who is an ethicist who has some experience with this subject too. But we're going to start with Ken Berger talking about his client, Roger Foley, and the audio tape you just heard. Hi, Ken. How are you?
I'm great, Trish. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing pretty well, thank you. I think I wanted to start off by saying to you that my own feelings about medically assisted dying have really changed in the past few years. I worked on a film for CBC called The Road to Mercy, and I was much more in favor of it than I am. And one of the reasons I'm disturbed, I guess is the best word, is your client's story, is the story of Roger Foley. And the audio, which we have just played for the audience, you didn't hear it, but I know you know what's in it, where there is a suggestion that perhaps using MAID would help solve the problem of his having no place to go or anybody to care for him. It really was a horrifying piece of audio. Tell me about Mr. Foley's story, would you please?
Sure, Trish. I'd be happy to tell you his story. First of all, it's really an impossible type of issue to regulate. When there was a prohibition against medical assistance in dying, people like Roger Foley and many others similarly situated were safe. They oftentimes had an easier time accessing the care that they needed, although that often remains a challenge, but it's heightened the difficulty of getting people with disability and complex needs, getting the care that they need because there is this other option, the only option that's provided to some now, the track for assisted dying. So Roger, my client, really wants to live with dignity, wants assistance to live with dignity, but all that he's being offered is an assisted death. And that is deeply troubling to the fabric of our country. And it seems to be I hate to use the analogy of an infection, but it seems to be a dangerous virus that's spreading, and the practice of it is sliding, where Roger's story and some other stories that have recently come out starting to shed light on your own change in what you think of assisted dying. It's really out of control.
It is out of control. Tell me about about Roger Foley. He is suffering from, is this a neurological issue that he has?
Yes. So he suffers from cerebellar ataxia. So it's a neurodegenerative condition that robs Roger of basically all of his independence. So he can't walk, he can't eat solid food. He's really needs assistance to move. He can't care for himself, like wash and bathe. He needs lots of assistance to eat and a special diet. So he's extremely disabled and needs lots of equipment and lots of assistance in the hospital. He wants to be in the community and have support and care team and equipment, the type of home care that's really tailored to his needs, that's flexible, that can provide a quality of care and a quality of life for him.
So when that audio was recorded, he was in hospital in London, and he'd been there for a while, right? A couple of years. Is that true?
He remains in the hospital.
Wow.
Because the system is refusing to provide the quality home care and reintegrate him to be part of the community again. They're essentially refusing to provide him with access to a quality home care so that he can reintegrate into the community. And they've essentially only offered him the suggestion of assisted dying.
I just wanted to emphasize that he is in the hospital asking for self-directed home care. So he's not at the mercy of the system. He can make his own choices and have some agency over his own life. But the what was offered to him by the person in that audio was either this ever increasing hospital charge of, it was at $1,600 per day or some ludicrous amount of money, or perhaps considering physician assisted dying. That is what in this country we seem to be offering people now who need our help. And I must say that after 2.5 years of COVID nonsense and now this, my feelings about the medical community have really changed. I don't trust them anymore after this kind of conversation, that it's even an alternative, that rather than caring for somebody in our society, we would offer them death. What is wrong with us? There's something wrong with us that he is even able to make that kind of recording in a hospital, in Canada. It makes no sense to me.
There is definitely something seriously wrong in it, and it's very deep and very troubling, and the public really doesn't know how this happened and why. First of all, Roger not only was threatened the daily non-OHIP rate for an essential medical service to live with dignity, but they've sent him a bill for over $1 million. So there's over $1 million bill has been sent to his home, which he wants to return to live. And they're sending bills. Well, he's suffering and having ongoing challenges in the hospital. They're sending a collection agency after him. And over $1 million a bill is over his head, over his life. What's happening here is totally wrong, and the practice has slid. It's out of control. In Carter, it said that the practice wouldn't slide, but it's slid and it's out of control. And this is not how we treat Roger Foley. This is not how we treat our veterans that have fought for us in wars. We offer them assisted dying because they have post-traumatic stress disorder for fighting for our country.
Did that actually happen?
I don't know the particulars of that case, and I think that the individual in that case wished to remain anonymous.
Yeah.
But there's certainly, I think that there was an admission from Veterans Canada that that type of conversation happened, and that just speaks to how we've lost our compass. We have a loss for not thinking about what the value is of sanctity of life, about diversity, about living with disability, and being an inclusive society where we celebrate people that are different. And we've completely lost it. And now in March, apparently, we're moving to minors starting from 12 years old, people with mental illness who potentially are seeking help because they're depressed and suicidal. And then we have people that were claiming that just because you need some care and you've lost your independence, that assisted dying is the answer.
Yeah, it's shocking to me. The thing, and maybe we'll bring in Mr. Koch here to help us out. Hi, Tom Koch. How are you?
Not bad, thanks. And yourself?
I'm good. I just wanted to introduce you. You're a Vancouver-based medical ethicist specializing in chronic and palliative care, as I understand it. I was just having a conversation specifically about the Roger Foley case, which I guess everybody knows something about now. But I wanted to just broaden it out a bit, and maybe we'll circle back to Mr. Foley in a minute. But what troubles me about this, the phrase is slippery slope, probably overused, but it seems like it's really appropriate here because we are halfway down the mountain, it would seem. The thing that I learned in working on that documentary film, which I do stand behind, but might have had a bit of a different approach had I worked on it today, the one called The Road to Mercy that ran on CBC, is the idea that some people who request physician-assisted dying, or MAID as it's now called, did it because they didn't want to be a burden to their families. And that always really bothered me. The idea that now in a society, it's looking after a loved one who is ill or disabled is considered a burden, and that we let the disabled person think that. I feel like there's something really wrong there.
The Health Canada report on MAID shows basically a fear of loss of autonomy as being one of the significant reasons why people do request medical termination, which is a little different from the issue of burden, which is there. But a lot of it in Canada refers to things like the inability to do what one could before and the sense of the loss of autonomy as primary reasons why people are asking for medical termination.
But I guess I'm wondering I just want to ask you, what has changed in our culture now that somebody would feel perfectly fine walking into the room in a hospital of Mr. Foley and saying, well, if you can't afford it, why don't you try this? I mean, something must have changed that we accept that kind of behavior, or that somebody even would think that way. It makes no sense to me.
Well, the ethicist who went in and did this tried to say, well, you could have this, you have this option. They were encouraging it. Mr. Foley has been intransigent in his insistence that the home care that he was offered was basically dangerous, and that he would not return to his home until and unless he was assured of appropriate care. And the issue of the home care for people with severe limits like Mr. Foley is an ongoing issue handled differently in different provinces. In British Columbia, people can, in fact, get the monies to hire the people they want to assure their own care. But the greater issue is the degree to which we believe that people who are in some ways facing chronic limits, sometimes they're progressive, whether it's often neurologic, it may be a progressive or a chronic form of cancer. Those lives, are they worth our support as a nation? And that is the underpinning of the ethical issues which surround all of these cases. Going back to the 90s, when I started working in this area, there was an idea that it's great if somebody terminates or is terminated by a loved one because they were
suffering
at a stage of dementia, they were at a stage of physical limitation from paraplegia, and that this was good. I remember a story in the Vancouver Sun by a guy named Stan Paretsky who said, we terminate our dogs, why can't we terminate our loved ones? And I wrote a piece which basically said that the disabled are not dogs, that these are human beings, and that the question is the level to which we as a society will care. Two of the big bioethicists in Canada, Udo Schucklink and Jocelyn Downey, last year wrote an article saying, were the concerns of those like me, who in the 90s were very, very cautious about the idea of introducing MAID, were those ideas fulfilled? Was there a slippery slope? Were we going to see a lot more people? And they said, oh no, everything is fine. All those worries were unfounded. And I wrote a paper after that using Health Canada data to say everything we worried about in the 90s about the introduction of MAID into Canadian health has occurred. Every year, the number of people increase. There is a slippery slope. The degree and the class of the people for whom it is allowed has gone from people with unpalliable pain at the end of their life, or pain that's not well managed, to people who are basically suffering from ennui. And so we have had this expansion of cases, far less serious than Mr. Foley's, of people who are being terminated for reasons which seem almost suspicious. The Birkendens, who were a famous case last year, a couple in their 90s, who basically wanted to die together because they were afraid of getting more ill later. And one of the assessors assessed him as being eligible for medical termination because he suffered from a terminal condition called old age. Well, he could easily have lived to be 100 or 101 or 102. That's not a terminal condition, but the degree to which some assessors are easily saying, yes, of course, we'll grant this for what to me are spurious clinical reasons, are evident in the cases like the Birkendens.
So I just want to put this question to both of you. I'll go back to Ken for a minute on this one. And the question is this, that initially when we were asked to consider this, to be part of this, to approve this democratically, the idea, as I understood it, was for people, nobody wants to die in terrible pain, right? And we're all afraid of that. But what I see happening now, and again, going back to COVID and what we learned about the long-term care, and my husband and I even have had this discussion facetiously, right? We say we would rather go to Switzerland than end up in one of the long-term care homes in Ontario. And we know that because we were looking for one for a family friend who had dementia. And they were so disgusting that I guess the argument now, if you live in Ontario, unless you're super wealthy, which we aren't, is that you either end up in a horrible place if that's what your end of life is like, or you take care of it another way. I feel like that's what we're left with. Ken, do you see where I'm coming from on that?
I see where you're coming from, Trish. Let's start with the Rodriguez majority opinion, where the court determined that medical assistance in dying was not a legal right. And the reason that they determined that is the consequences are egregious and very serious, that it results in abuse to vulnerable persons. Yeah. So that was essentially what the court held in Rodriguez, that it was dangerous and there would be a slippery slope if we allowed assistance in dying. Almost all health conditions can be, the pain, the unbearable suffering can be relieved by good medicine, by access to high quality palliative care. The troubling issues that can be seen, it's really hard to quantify exactly why individuals access medical assistance in dying. Is it really that they're having unbearable pain that can't be relieved from high quality palliative care? Or is it just based on their beliefs that is a right that they wish to access? So the Parliament voted after Rodriguez, and a large majority of the MPs at the time refused to allow medical assistance in dying or euthanasia. And it was a court that decided to change the law in Canada. And as Dr. Koch has mentioned, the consequences of doing so have been dramatic and extremely concerning. All of the worries that Justice Sapinka in Rodriguez and many of the bioethicists that opposed medical assistance in dying highlighted that this was going to happen, and it is happening, and it's sliding out of control. If people have fears that they don't want to live in a long-term care facility, then we should be improving the quality of our long-term care facilities.
Yes.
We should be improving the quality of our home care. The problem is that there's been misinformation and a lot of glorification of medical assistance in dying as the ultimate liberty, where it really is not. It's the under Section 7 of the Charter, the rights are life, liberty, and security of the person. And what is happening is we're losing precious lives. People with disability have no security and safety. We have no security of the person. And we don't have liberty, real liberty, because we don't have choice. We don't have choice and options between a dignified life and assistance in living and quality of care. We have a silo that people believe that some people believe that it's their only option. It isn't their only option, and there needs to be better education, and the public needs to be informed how and why this whole regime happened, and there's been a change in culture. And
absolutely,
that's the responsibility of how and why this has all happened. It's not. It's all wrong. And hopefully Mr. Foley's case and your good work in being an investigative journalist and others do what they can to educate the public on what is really happening, what happens behind closed doors, what happens in hospitals, what is our legal system doing, what is our medical system doing. Ultimately, their duty is to protect persons with disability.
Let me break in here for a sec, if I may. First of all, Trish, I want to say that I don't like working in nursing homes. I've worked in homes where people are very well cared for. There is a whole range of facilities available, but I wouldn't dismiss them all as horrible. I took care of my father for 5 years in the States because the homes there that I found were not acceptable. So I did the home care. In my submissions in Carter, And what I have said since the 90s is that until we can provide and assure the balance between an equal choice of living with dignity despite restrictions and dying with so-called dignity, then there is no choice. And the problem has been that this has been put forward as an individual choice when, in fact, the cards are stacked against them. As I said in an article in 98, it's like playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded revolver. The arguments which have made the critical change have been based on this idea of autonomy and the individual's right to choose. But the question is, do they have a free choice? And the individual's right to choose is not if I want X, everybody else has to give me X. And that has been, in this area, what has been the disagreement.
Well, I will take it on faith that there are some good care homes, but I am telling you, we couldn't find one that didn't smell like human feces. And I think that the reviews that were done over the deaths in long-term care from COVID were a national shame. So there may be some places that are good. I hear Bridgepoint in Toronto is quite good, but the places that were available for this elderly woman we were trying to find, there was nothing. There was nothing.
I understand that, but I, as I said, I would not use too broad of a brush.
Okay.
For people who are trying to provide acceptable care in these homes without adequate pay and without adequate resources are people we should respect, because they understand also that the resources have not been put towards that.
Listen, I'm not blaming the people and the places. I am blaming our culture. I am blaming a culture where, I saw a very interesting interview with Victor Davis Hanson a couple of days ago. And he said that he grew up on a farm in California. And he said, oh yeah, I had an aunt who lived in our living room for like 60 years. She was disabled and she just lived in the house with them.
Yeah.
And he grew up with a disabled person in the house and it was no big deal. They cared for her, right? We don't do that anymore. And that's part of what is fueling my rage at what has happened to Mr. Foley and anyone else who is feeling that they're being warehoused and discarded. That I think you said it. You said there was a change in the culture, and there has been a change in the culture. And I think it's reflected very, very clearly in how we are falling off a cliff now with assisted dying. To be sure, I don't necessarily think we should roll it all back yet. I think for some people in some circumstances, if it's very, very highly monitored, it's still a road to mercy. But that's for another day. I'm just stating my position. But I think overall, we have a problem. Like when we did our film and we learned that you could get a physician-assisted dying in Belgium if you were depressed, I was like, well, that's crazy. That's never going to come here. We'll never do that. And apparently it is here. Apparently it is here.
The law requires 2 assessors, but the quality of the assessors that I have seen is variable. I have had cases where the patients wanted and were insistent on MAID, and we could sort of understand why they were doing that. We do know from the Health Canada data why many people are asking for it. Part of it is the culture of autonomy and the thinking that we can all do everything on our own, and if we can't, then there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Where none of us do everything on our own. I use a walker because of my spinal arthritis, and people are, getting on the bus. People get up and move, make room for me. People open the door for me. We have a sense of basically assistance at a certain level. There is an ignorance about the fact that many people will say, I don't want to die like my mother did in pain. I don't want to see what happened to me, what happened to my uncle. Where palliative medicine in the last 20 years has made tremendous advances in the ability to provide comfort for people with many of these progressive conditions.
Yeah.
One does not need, if one has ALS, to die gasping for breath. One can medically basically treat that. The question is, will that person wish to die in the respiratory crisis, or will they accept the type of respiratory ventilation, sort of like after polio, which comes from respiratory paralysis? I grew up in the era of polio, where people were in iron lungs, and we celebrated the lives that had been saved.
I know. You see pictures of people in those old iron lungs, and they're always smiling.
I grew up reading Reader's Digest about this person who was a bridge master, this person who had finished college. My uncle ran one of the first rehab centers for children with polio, and I used to go there and play when I was 3, 4, and 5 and come home crying because those kids had all these cool toys, which we didn't have because we didn't need them for ambulation.
Right.
The ability of the society to provide and see, and we took pride in the 50s with what we could do.
Yeah.
Now, the first thing which happened when COVID came was the ethicists were saying, well, here's how we're going to triage the patients. We've moved basically from a care model to a commercial model in which scarcity is assumed to be necessary and self-evident. And the individual who no longer finds him or herself autonomous and says, I can't live like that. But we know from my work and the work of others that even somebody with a high spinal injury, everybody will have suicidal ideation. Everybody will think about dying.
Yeah.
Over 2/3 will, after 2 years with rehabilitation and care, find life is different, but at least equally worth living.
Well, look at Christopher Reeve. I mean, he had a wonderful life and a wonderful marriage, and apparently he was quite suicidal for a very, very long time after the injury. Ken, I want to ask you something because I want to just hear a little bit more about Mr. Foley. How is his mood in fighting this fight? He must be just sick of it.
This weighs on Roger tremendously, that he has to fight every day to live. He's in danger. He feels unsafe. He wants help and support and to live a quality of life. And he's a really bright individual. He wants to be in the community, getting the equipment and the care that he could receive to live in dignity. Yet he has to fight this system that results in tremendous negative consequences to somebody with disability. Because when you have a change in culture, it excuses not helping somebody like Mr. Foley. It excuses, we don't have to provide the care. We can close our emergency departments. We can just come up with reasons for why we don't want to provide Roger with full quality home care, and he has to fight. And then the hospital is sending bills. People demean him because of his disabilities. They say he should be more independent, but he's not independent because out of no fault of his own, he's got a serious neurological condition. And as a result of what he's gone through, it's truly amazing. He spends most of his days researching, and he's really found lots of information that's deeply troubling. And he's he helps me as his counsel with information, because he's fighting for his life, quality of life. He's fighting to be part of Canadian society.
Ken, is there any do we know what is happening with his bringing forward the court case? Is there any date set?
Sure, I can update the listeners that there's been recently a new case management judge that's been assigned. So unfortunately, Mr. Foley from the outset has wanted, because of this is a really important case. He's wanted to have a trial on all of the evidence and have his full case tried in court. However, what has happened is the defendants have decided to bog the case down with motions or motion practice, which can delay the case for sometimes months or years, and that's what's happened, unfortunately. And Roger tried to reach an agreement with the court's help to not have to deal with motions to delay the merits of the case, to allow the evidence to speak. But again, we're unfortunately back in the situation where Roger has to deal with, likely with these motions, which delays the case, unfortunately.
And look, in Roger's case, what has happened is the province, which has responsibility for the health of its citizens under the Federal Health Act, has basically subcontracted the issues of home care down through the lens to companies whose care, by everything Roger has said and that we have read, was not only suboptimal but dangerous. And this brings us to the question of the degree to which we want in our blood services, what we want in our home care, we want our hospitals, the assumption that we can just lay off the responsibility to a private for-profit, which will, and this was something which came up with all of the homes in COVID, the degree to which the assumption that we can lay off to the private company the responsibility of the public good is something which has not been discussed, but is a critical element not only of Roger's case, but of a lot of these issues of the longer-term care, the status of the home care services, the status of the nursing home facilities. And we find that very often the services are suboptimal whenever we're dealing with a company whose first goal is profit.
Yeah.
And whose second goal is care.
Well, but you know what? I'll tell you something. After COVID and watching how catastrophically it was handled and managed by our socialized medicine here, I am on the fence about what we should be doing. I just think everything they did made it worse. They prioritized only the virus over people with other problems. They didn't care about people with other problems. So I don't trust that either. I felt sort of like my family doctor was acting as an agent of the state, which is, I suppose, fine if you think the state has your best interests at heart. But they so botched COVID and caused so much collateral damage that I honestly can't say that I think that private healthcare would have done a worse job. I'm not sure they would have. I think the NHS and our healthcare system are two of the worst in the world after COVID.
Trish, if I could just respond to that, I think the sliding of the assisted dying regime and the inadequate care and ineptitude and how the system is struggling through COVID and through other issues. I don't think it's really a private or public issue. I think it really speaks to, your underlying philosophy of quality first, building capacity, developing like efficient means that are also of high quality to deliver healthcare services. And I think through the assisted dying and a lot of the difficulties that we see, I agree with you, Trish, that it's not really a private or a public or what will do better. All of the systems have to do better to protect people's lives, provide quality of care in a tailored manner, and to provide it in a less intrusive manner where people can live in the community regardless of their level of dependence. And they're going to have a quality of life. And you can do that through efficient means, whether it's public or private. I mean, people like to blame. That's how they justify sometimes the actions. They try and say, well, it's the private homes or abuse in assisted dying cases. It was just one person or one individual or this place or that place. I think we have to focus more on fixing the systemic problems, fixing the culture, and trying to understand, look inside ourselves and try and understand how we let this happen, why we let this happen, and make some corrections. It's hard to admit that this was a mistake. It's hard to admit it. It's going to be really hard to change it. But Roger is up, despite his disabilities, is fighting for the change that needs to occur.
4 years before COVID, I was lecturing to medical groups on the coming pandemic. And this is not the big one. COVID is not the disease X WHO has warned us about. We had, after SARS, a good blueprint for how to prepare for a pandemic. And in the United States and Canada and England, within a few years, all that blueprint of what to do, how to supply, really just was forgotten. We have great experience in dealing with pandemics and epidemics. We go back, I go back in history basically to the first ones from Hippocrates. We know a great deal about what will happen and how society can do well or ill. I don't think COVID was a total disaster in Canada. I disagree with you, Tris.
Well, let me just say it is a disaster if somebody in your family overdosed because there was no 12-step meetings. It is a disaster if your child's education is destroyed because they closed the schools. It is a disaster if you were forced to take a vaccine and had side effects. It is a disaster if you lost your business. I'm sorry. There's very, very little evidence that the lockdowns did anything but cause harm. Sweden did just fine by doing not even a tenth of what we did. So I don't buy into the idea that they didn't screw it up royally. I think they did. I think it's the biggest public health disaster ever. And historians will look back on this as a very, very, very bad time. I'm sorry.
Trish, I would say also that the sliding medical assisted dying practices as or much worse than the COVID disaster. Just people don't know, public doesn't have all the information.
And I think that's where the change comes from. I think that medicine culturally has changed, right? When I say, I don't mean to be too aggressive about COVID, but I've been covering it for 2 years, so I'm still and will continue to be riled up about it. But for them to say we're closing the hospitals, you can say goodbye to your dying mother on an iPad and we can't accommodate that, or we're not going to treat cancer patients. I mean, there is something fundamentally inhumane going on in their approach to dealing with COVID. And so now I guess what I'm saying is I see that inhumanity sliding over now into assisted dying, that these are people I no longer trust to make those decisions. And in a sense, the fact that somebody working for a hospital could have that conversation with Roger Foley kind of proves my point in my head that we are dealing with a big, as you said, Tom, cultural crisis, but also a moral crisis. I'm sorry. This does not represent who I think we should be as a people anymore. I don't think it does.
And I saw this beginning in the 70s when somebody took over one of the major hospitals as the CEO in Vancouver, was appointed, and he came out of lumber, didn't know anything about health.
Yeah.
We have adopted a business model for healthcare, which has no slack and treats medicine and medical choice in the same way as if it was a commercial enterprise. And going back to 1963, the Nobel Prize-winning economist Kenneth Arrow pointed out that you cannot treat medicine as another business. And much of the argument by those who are most strongly in favor of medical termination are those who are basically taking pretty much a business model. They want to basically see doctors as salespersons, and the patient chooses from X,
Right.
Y, and Z, getting what is available. We have gone to a business model of medicine, and the premier of Ontario says, well, we'll put this much money in, we're doing fine. Well, they're not doing fine. What the question is where do we prioritize for everybody the health and welfare and security of the person? And who do we prioritize it for? There are many who are for MAID who are basically will not look at the data, will not look at why people are choosing MAID. And part of it is the desire, the belief that if one is not autonomous and able to do everything oneself, life is not worth living.
Or that life just sucks, right? That's also not a good...
Life will, and what happens is, and what I tell people is when you have one of these life-changing conditions, I lost my news career because I couldn't work on the computers because of my vision. I went from being the top medical reporter in Canada probably to being on the slag.
Yeah. Sorry.
I understand that emotional sense of loss, but I was lucky I was able to refashion my careers in different ways. The question is, let us put it this way. There is a difference between suicide. If you wish to kill yourself, I may not be happy about it, but I can't stop it. You may, drive your car into a brick wall. You may jump off a bridge. The single act of autonomous suicide, we can lament and we try and stop. Medical termination MAID is not an individual act. It is the individual saying, I think my life is bad, and I want you to end it for me. And that is a communal act requiring a group of people, from the pharmacists who provide the drugs to the physicians who basically administer it. And we have basically a break between the autonomous and the communal and the social view of what we mean by when will life be not worth living. We know that every time you have these losses, and sometimes it's as simple as not being able to drive.
Yeah.
Life changes. The life you lived is over. Doesn't mean life is over. It means the life you lived is over. And so there is a period of depression, of reformation, of recreation. And then if you've done well and the medicine has done well, you can come to a new kind of life, which, while different, is at least equally acceptable. I remember a man with high spinal injury. He had been an airplane pilot who was at a party and dove into a pool which had no
water,
which had no water, and had something like a C5 injury. And his life with his wife, he was high spinal, but it was good. And it was good in ways he could never have conceived beforehand. And I see this with other seniors in the early stages of dementia, which is scary, but it doesn't mean that their life is not worth living or that they will not get joy in the life, which is what is left to them in a new condition. And so we have become rigid in our sense of what is acceptable.
I think
life.
that's true.
We saw this with polio. I wrote an article years ago saying if polio were to return today, and we took as a nation and as in the industrial world pride in the ability to maintain and to assist those people who, because of polio, had withered limbs or respiratory difficulties. Amazingly, many of the people on iron lung, almost all of them, graduated to more and less intrusive means of breathing aids. And now they're going through post-polio syndrome. But that was a matter of pride nationally.
Yeah,
that we could
well, we
do
don't
that.
have that anymore. We don't
That's
have
right.
that communal feeling about it. And the idea that we would, well, even for dementia, I know when we were doing that film, we looked at dementia and why that's a very, very tricky one, because people can sign a document saying, if I get to the point where I don't recognize my children, that is when you should do the euthanasia. But what they were finding in Belgium, and I think Holland as well, was that people at that stage of dementia tend to be, many of them, quite happy. And in that demented state, even though they don't recognize their family, they are, as a human unit, happy and don't want to die. So then what do you do legally? Do you honor the directive they made when they were aware? Or do you put to death someone who's actually happy, even though we don't think they should be? Because, right? I mean, it's a really tough, and it's for people way, way smarter than I am. I don't know the answer to that question, but
this is why I never recommend to families advance directives. We do not know, and I've been doing this and researching this as well as working with families since 2000. We do not know in health how we will feel if we are in distress. We do not know, we cannot imagine, even if we know somebody who has had this, how we will feel if we wake up after a stroke and one side of our body is no longer working. We know we will be depressed. We know we will be scared. But how do we can we find a life worth living? The answer is with appropriate rehabilitation and counseling and care. Yes, over 2/3 of the people
this feels like it requires the thing you're not allowed to say these days, which is a spiritual solution. It feels like there needs to be a spiritual component of this as well. I want to ask you, Ken, just about the lawsuit that you have ongoing. What is he trying to achieve? What is the underpinning of the lawsuit?
The underpinning of the lawsuit is that we're putting to death people that could easily have a good quality of life and a happy life. So the current provisions under C7, it's overbroad in that we're wrongfully putting to death people that could otherwise live, and that there isn't a free and informed choice. That this is the people who have disability or who are dependent or elderly or have various fears and worries are being coerced into an assisted death without all the access to the care and all of the information. There's never been anyone who is and has been victimized like Roger and suffered abuse and not having adequate care, that it's never been Roger Foley or many Canadians who are either wrongfully put to their death or face abuse or challenges getting adequate care to live. It's never been that person bringing the court action. It's been just some individuals that have asked for this right for an assisted suicide. So Roger believes that the court will deem the existing law unconstitutional and that the law can be struck, that there aren't sufficient and adequate safeguards. And he's also challenging the conduct and the violations of various levels of government and agencies. Many experts in the international community have highlighted, not only in Roger's case, but in other cases, that what's happening to persons with disability and how this regime is sliding out of control, that this needs to be fixed, that there's a serious wrong on many levels, and this runs deep, and how and why this happened. And Roger is hoping that he not only gets access to justice, but he hopes that justice will be done. that justice will be served, that this will be corrected. So lives will be safe, that people will have a security of their person, people will not be abused or taken advantage of and exploited, and people will get the care that they need when they need it, and the system will provide better care both in institutions and, most importantly, in the community, and develop efficient processes, and that this terrible cultural change is fixed. But it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge to get when we've gone off the rails and we've done wrong. When we've done wrong, it's really hard to fix that. But the court has the ability to fix this.
Well, I remember when we were doing the Road to Mercy for CBC, that the people who were against physician-assisted dying, I think it was called PAD, now it's called MAID, warned of exactly this thing. And the proponents said, no, that's not going to happen. There are safeguards. I mean, it's remarkable how it's played out exactly like the critics said. So I just want to say thank you both for appearing today. I think it's a really important issue. It's not getting a lot of attention in the mainstream media, not as much as it should anyway. And that's because I think there is also some ideology behind this, but that's maybe for another day. So thank you both, and give our best wishes, please, to your client, would you, Mr. Berger?
Yes, Trish, she's very thankful for you, and also Dr. Koch, it's a pleasure to participate with you. This is very fundamental that the public is educated. There's another side that's not being told, and the public doesn't really know how this happened, why this happened, and what is actually happening. So thank you, Trish, for starting some public education on this, because I think it's necessary and important.
Thank you. Tom, do you want to say goodbye?
Sure. Let me just say, yes, the overriding principle in law and culture really has been one of autonomy. Sue Rodriguez says, it's my body, why can't I do what I want? In cases, this becomes in dealing with with people in these situations, not Rogers, I'm talking about others, it often gets very complex. People's what they want, what they say at a moment, how they interact with their families, the pressures that they undergo. Each one of the cases where I've been involved over the last 20 years, the ethicists in the law make it sound like it's a very simple, clear-cut situation. It often isn't. It's nuanced, and it requires the attention of assuring not only the facilities, but the voices of those engaged who can be heard, and you take the time to work.
Well, we're not very good on nuance in this culture anymore. You know that, right? We can't do it.
Well, when you are clinically involved in these things, you have to be good with nuance.
No, I understand. Yes, agreed. But that we don't seem to be.
The practitioners who are engaged at these levels in palliative, in a hospice, are with the families, with the person in need, are dealing with nuances every day. And what we have to do is be clearer on, in these cases, how the realities are simpler, are more complex than the simplistic ethics which is being applied.
Well, it's really interesting you use the phrase bodily autonomy, because the same people saying that MAID is underpinning bodily autonomy. I mean, there are people making that argument. It's my body, my choice, are the same people who insisted everybody get a vaccine that they were worried about. So, lots of hypocrisy going on these days. But anyway.
It's not hypocrisy. These are people, they're holding different opinions, and they don't see basically the relation of one thing to the other.
No, they don't. And I'm sick. I'll tell you something. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of people not being able to think critically about issues. You use the word nuance. It's a really, really important word. I totally agree with you. But people are thinking in black and white. They're either on this side of it or this side of it, and they don't know how to move from issue to issue. They're kind of responding based on what their tribe is telling them to do, right? And, and as someone, like I did that film, and the people who were supporting PAD, as it was called, they were mostly on the left. They were on the left. And I'm sure they're still the people who are supporting it now. And they're still the same people who support abortion up to and including, the third trimester. Because ideologically that makes sense, even though the reality of it is something we shouldn't be countenancing. I'll say that even as a feminist, third trimester, I'm against it. Right. So people are not thinking in nuanced ways. They're not understanding the culture that they live in anymore. And that, and I'll just say it, there's a great scene in Fried Green Tomatoes where the Jessica Tandy character is talking about caring for a disabled son that she had, right? And the woman she's speaking to says, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And she says, no, he was the greatest gift of my life. I'm so glad I had that disabled boy. I think he had cognitive issues or something. And I thought that's a really, really radical thing to say, because people don't view the world that way anymore. Everything is a goddamn burden. They don't, they don't want to lean into the things in life that can make it worth living.
I'm finishing a book just on these precise things, but I'm reminded of Oliver Sacks, who I knew.
I knew Oliver Sacks too. I knew him well.
Oliver had a case of a man with a son with severe developmental difficulties, really couldn't speak or do much. And Oliver asked the man, "Do you think he loves you in the same way that you care for him?" And the man thought a minute and said to Sacks, "I think he loves me as much as he can." And the ability to accept that, which is a nuance rather than the absolute, was one of Oliver Sacks's greatest strengths. And I think as we move forward in society, as these things occur again and again, people like me who have been arguing against this for years on the grounds of it's not an appropriate choice and we are denying a kind of life which can be lived, it feels like we're losing, but I think in the long run, society will grow up.
Yeah. Well, one hopes. I mean, I'm not on the fence. I've been pulled now. I'm much more critical of it. I still think I might want it at some point if I'm in a situation. But you know what? I have the ability to fly to Switzerland, right? Because I'm not poor. So
none of us know how we will feel when we are faced with these fundamental existential moments.
True. I get it. I absolutely get it. I totally understand that this is a theoretical idea for me right now, based in part on the fact that I don't want to be a burden to my children, which is the wrong way to think about it. That's not heroic. You're depriving them of the ability to really deeply love and care for you the way you did for them. And number two, I have no faith, as I said at the beginning of this thing, in how the province of Ontario is running long-term care. I'm not going anywhere near them. So that's why, and those are not good reasons for wanting to kill yourself. Those are not actually good reasons.
No, it is a very good reason to write to your in Ontario to agitate with other people for a change in policy or a change in government. And that's what we have to do in each of our provinces. And this is what we have to do when we write to our members of parliament and say, look, there is this and this we think has to be changed. It is part of the process of re-educating ourselves and our society so we can get back to where we were in the days of poliomyelitis, when we can get back to the days in which we actually recovered from influenza in 1919 to 1923. And societies learn and forget.
Yeah.
And we are sort of at the cusp of trying to, with the most egregious cases like Mr. Foley's, but with the type of cases I deal with all the time, get people to re-understand and relive from their daily life into how to basically translate that into a political action.
Just a brief response. I think Roger's case is just the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of cases, but a lot of those people have been put to their death. And I think the answer, Trish, to you is really to improve the quality of home care, improve the quality of long-term care. I'm not coerced. You should never feel coerced.
No, that's just terrible. That's terrible.
You may find value in in new life, then you never know the value in your new life, even if you have some disabilities, may be more rewarding for you. So I don't think we should give up. We shouldn't give up on Roger. We shouldn't give up as a nation. We need to correct this, and I think we need to also figure out how this happened and why this happened. Was it a natural evolution or change, or was there something that caused the cultural shift? I think the public needs to educate themselves, because this is just too important. It's about life and death. It's about quality and healthcare. It's about our legal system and our medical system are protecting us and doing what is right and what is just. And Roger Foley's case is important for that, and hopefully it sparks change. But we have a lot of work to do to educate the public on the reality of these issues.
Trish, have you written your MLA about how you feel?
No, I mean, this is a reasonably new issue for me.
Write your MLA next time. Bring
MPP,
the MLA
MPP.
I'm sorry, MPP.
Yeah.
I am surprised at the number of people who never write their MPPs or their MPs.
Yeah, I know, right?
And I'm surprised at the number of people who discuss these things but never. And when they come on the air, we allow them to speak in a formulaic fashion without saying, that's not doing the job for when people are being injured by their home care provider.
Well, that's legacy media, though. They don't ask anybody hard questions anymore.
You can bring this as a citizen, but also as somebody with your podcast.
Well, we will delve back in. We may do a show with some personal stories of people who wanted to do it and change their mind, or who are still thinking of it or whatever. I think it would be interesting to hear from that side of it.
But as I said, do it with the politician who is basically the one responsible for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we got to go because we're running out of time here, but I'm so grateful you gentlemen did it. And thank you for speaking out.
Nice talking to you again, Ken.
Yes, likewise. And Roger, thanks you, Trish, again.
Yeah. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for doing this. I couldn't be more grateful, and I'm glad I got to do it because I've been hopping mad since I learned about Mr. Foley's case. And I'm really grateful that we had a chance to expose some of this here. So thanks so much for doing it. And as I said, best regards to Mr. Foley, please. Thank you. Okay, that was Ken Berger, who is the lawyer for Roger Foley, who is fighting to have an assisted life as opposed to an assisted death, which they were talking to him about because he was becoming expensive. And, well, we assume that. I don't know that. But and also Tom Koch, who is an ethicist who has been thinking and writing and talking about this for some time. We need to wake up about this, people. You know, our long-term care and our care homes in this country, in this province of Ontario specifically, are terrible, many of them. And we need to start caring for people who are old, infirm, disabled. We really, that's how we should be judging ourselves as a society. And you know what? COVID showed us that we failed. You know, we locked old people away to die of isolation and loneliness. I mean, I can't even bear thinking about what was revealed about those places during COVID-19. And look, if it's government money, these things are being done in our name. So we need to have a bigger discussion about this. I don't think I'm anti-medical aid in dying 100%. I don't know if I'm an absoluter on that, but I'm certainly heading down that road because I don't trust them anymore. That is where I stand. So on this September 8th of 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died just as we were recording this. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I was quite moved by it. I feel upset. I really do. That's probably a generational thing. The young people listening to the show will just think I'm some old crank, which you probably do anyway. But there is something about the way she has carried herself all these years that has meaning for us in Canada and certainly for people in the UK. She's an extraordinary human being, and it's a sad day for all of us, I think. And also there will be some very interesting pageantry over the next few days. There's a lot of stuff going on. I think Charles is now sort of officially king or something. I think that happened right away. I know he showed up there today up in Balmoral with a briefcase, and he may have been carrying the documents that managed that transfer. They would have known this was not sudden. And I think that Camilla is now officially the consort, queen consort. I think that's what they are calling her. The queen was 96. She died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. I believe that by the time they were calling the family up, she was already gone. That's my sense of it, but what do I know? And we'll probably never actually know about that. And Harry was late. He missed being there before the announcement, so that's also interesting. So what I want to do for you to honor Her Majesty, the Queen, is play a speech she gave in, let me just find it here, when she was still a princess. And she gave it on April 21st, 1947, on her 21st birthday. It's lovely. It says a lot about her. And the ending now, the last thing she says in this clip is quite poignant, considering that she died today, meaning Thursday.
Let me begin by saying thank you to all the thousands of kind people who have sent me messages of goodwill. This is a happy day for me, but it is also one that brings serious thoughts of life looming ahead with all its challenges and with all its opportunity. Will you, the youth of the British family of nations, let me speak on my birthday as your representative. Now that we are coming to manhood and womanhood, it is surely a great joy to us all to think that we shall be able to take some of the burden off the shoulders of our elders who have fought and worked and suffered to protect our childhood. If we all go forward together with an unwavering faith, a high courage and a quiet heart, we shall be able to make of this ancient Commonwealth, which we all love so dearly, an even grander thing, more free, more prosperous, more happy, and a more powerful influence for good in the world than it has been in the greatest days of our forefathers. To accomplish that, we must give nothing less than the whole of ourselves. There is a motto which has been borne by many of my ancestors, a noble motto, I serve. Those words were an inspiration to many bygone heirs to the throne when they made their knightly dedication as they came to manhood. I cannot quite do as they did, but through the inventions of science, I can do what was not possible for any of them. I can make my solemn act of dedication with the whole empire listening. I should like to make that dedication now. It is very simple. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. But I shall not have strength to carry out this resolution alone, unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do. I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
So that was Queen Elizabeth II on her 21st birthday. There's a great line that she says to us, which is, we mustn't give less than the whole of ourselves, which was her pledge, and I think she did that. So I'll end by saying, stay critical, and we'll see ya.